On a bright Tuesday morning, Dr. Samantha Washington checked her appearance one final time in her car's mirror before stepping out into the private airport's parking lot. Her dark blue business suit was perfectly pressed, and her natural hair was styled in a professional twist. At 42 years old, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had earned every bit of her success. As the CDO of BioFuture Solutions, she had transformed a small research startup into a leading biotech company. Today was particularly important. She was flying to New York for a meeting that could change thousands of lives. Her company had developed a promising new cancer treatment, and this presentation to investors could secure the $50 million needed to begin clinical trials. Samantha walked toward the private terminal, her heels clicking against the pavement as she pulled her designer carry-on bag. The morning sun reflected off the sleek private jets parked on the tarmac. She had made this walk many times before over the past 5 years, ever since her company had grown enough to justify private travel. The familiar faces of the ground crew usually greeted her with warm smiles. But today, something felt different. As she approached the terminal entrance, she noticed a security guard she had never seen before. He stood with his feet planted wide, arms crossed over his chest, watching her with an expression that made her uncomfortable. Samantha took a deep breath and maintained her professional demeanor, reaching for the door handle. "Hold it right there," the guard said sharply, stepping in front of her. His name tag read Barrett. "Where do you think you're going?" Samantha kept her voice calm and steady. "Good morning. I'm here for my scheduled flight to New York." She reached into her bag for her identification and flight documentation. Barrett's eyes narrowed. "This is a private terminal. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Behind him, through the glass doors, Samantha could see other passengers moving freely through the security checkpoint. None of them were being stopped outside. She had flown from this terminal dozens of times, but something told her that explaining this wouldn't help. "Yes, I'm certain," she replied, extending her ID and flight papers. "I'm Dr. Samantha Washington, CEO of BioFuture Solutions. My flight is scheduled for 9:30 a.m. Barrett barely glanced at the documents. "These could be fake. We need to do additional verification. You'll have to wait." Just then, Maria Rodriguez, a well-known social media influencer, walked past them toward the terminal. Samantha recognized her from magazine covers. Barrett quickly stepped aside, giving Maria a friendly nod as she passed. "Good morning, miss. Had a nice flight." The contrast in treatment was stark. Maria noticed it too, slowing her steps and glancing back with concern. Discreetly, she pulled out her phone and began recording. Samantha checked her watch. 8:45 a.m. She needed to board by 9:15 to stay on schedule. The investors wouldn't wait, and rescheduling could set the project back by months. Each delay meant another day that patients waited for potentially life-saving treatment. "Sir," she said firmly, "I've flown from this terminal many times. You can check with your supervisor or the flight crew. They know me." "The supervisor's busy," Barrett shot back. "And I don't care if you claim to have flown here before. Things are different now. We have higher standards." The implied meaning of his words hung in the air. Samantha felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her expression neutral. She had faced discrimination before. It was sadly not uncommon as a black woman in corporate leadership. But this was different. Time was literally money today, and lives could depend on this meeting. She noticed Maria was still recording, though trying to appear casual about it. Other passengers had begun to stare. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, but none intervened. Through the terminal windows, Samantha could see her pilot doing his pre-flight check. He looked up, noticed her outside, and frowned in confusion. Samantha pulled out her phone and dialed her assistant. "Sarah, we may have a situation here. Can you please contact the terminal management?" She kept her voice professional but loud enough to be heard. Barrett shifted his weight, suddenly looking less certain. The story of what happened next would soon spread across social media and news outlets nationwide, but in that moment, standing in the morning sun outside a private terminal, Dr. Samantha Washington simply straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and prepared herself for a fight she never should have had to face, but one she would make sure had lasting consequences. Sarah's voice came through Samantha's phone, clear and concerned. "Dr. Washington, I'm calling the terminal manager right now. Is everything okay?" Before Samantha could answer, Barrett stepped closer, his large frame casting a shadow over her. No phone calls allowed in the security area, he snapped, though several other passengers inside the terminal were clearly using their phones. "I'll call you back, Sarah," Samantha said calmly, ending the call. She noticed Maria was still recording discreetly from nearby, pretending to check her social media while capturing everything. Barrett seemed to grow more aggressive with each passing minute. "You need to leave the premises," he demanded, his voice getting louder. "This is a private facility." "I will not leave," Samantha replied firmly. "I have a scheduled flight and all the proper documentation. Your behavior is inappropriate and discriminatory." The word discriminatory caught the attention of nearby passengers. A small crowd had begun to gather, watching the scene unfold. Some pulled out their phones, joining Maria in recording the incident. "Are you accusing me of something?" Barrett's face reddened. "I'm just doing my job. We have strict security protocols." Just then, an elderly white businessman approached the entrance. Barrett immediately stepped aside, giving him a respectful nod. "Good morning, sir. Have a pleasant flight." The contrast was so obvious that several onlookers gasped. The businessman paused, looking between Barrett and Samantha with growing understanding. "Excuse me," the businessman said, "but I couldn't help noticing what's happening here. I've seen this lady at this terminal before. She's a regular passenger." Barrett's face tightened. "Sir, this is a security matter. Please proceed inside." But the businessman, Mr. James Cooper, didn't move. "No, I don't think I will. Not until this situation is resolved properly." He turned to Samantha. "Dr. Washington, right? I remember you from a business conference last year. Your cancer research presentation was impressive." Samantha nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Cooper." More passengers had stopped now, creating a small crowd. The terminal's regular staff looked increasingly uncomfortable, but still hesitated to intervene. Through the windows, Samantha's pilot had noticed the commotion and was walking toward the terminal. Barrett's walkie-talkie crackled. "Barrett, what's the holdup at the entrance? We're getting complaints." He grabbed the device. "Just handling a security situation. Got someone here without proper clearance." "That's a lie," Maria suddenly spoke up, stepping forward with her phone still recording. "I've been filming everything. This woman has shown all her documents, and you've let everyone else through without even checking theirs." The pilot reached the terminal door, stepping outside. "What's going on here?" "Dr. Washington, your flight is scheduled for departure in 30 minutes. "Captain Miller," Samantha greeted him with relief. "This guard is refusing to let me enter the terminal despite my documentation." Captain Miller frowned deeply. "Barrett, is it? Dr. Washington is one of our most frequent flyers. I've personally flown her at least 20 times. Proper protocols must be followed," Barrett insisted, but his voice had lost some of its authority. More phones were recording now, and he was beginning to realize the situation had spiraled beyond his control. The walkie-talkie crackled again. "Barrett, report to the main office immediately. Send the passenger through." But Barrett made one last mistake. "I won't be responsible for security breaches. She needs additional verification." Maria stepped closer, her phone steady. "Additional verification of what, exactly? Would you like to explain to my 3 million followers why you're treating Dr. Washington differently from every other passenger?" The terminal doors opened, and a man in a suit hurried out. "I'm Thomas Reynolds, the terminal manager. Dr. Washington, please accept our sincere apologies. Please, come inside. Barrett, my office. Now." As Samantha finally walked through the doors, the gathered crowd actually applauded. Mr. Cooper patted her shoulder supportively, and Maria gave her a small nod. "This isn't over," Samantha said quietly to the manager. "What happened here today can't be ignored." "No, ma'am, it won't be," Reynolds agreed, looking worried. "We'll deal with this immediately." Barrett stood frozen, watching as his actions over the past hour began to have consequences. Maria's live stream had already reached thousands of viewers, and clips were being shared across social media platforms. As Samantha walked toward the security checkpoint, head held high, she knew that while she had won this confrontation, the real work was just beginning. This incident would not be swept under the rug. She would make sure of that. Maria Rodriguez sat in her private jet's comfortable leather seat, but she wasn't relaxing. Her fingers moved quickly across her phone screen as she edited the video of what had just happened. With 5 years of experience as a social justice influencer, she knew this story needed to be told right. "Miss Rodriguez, we're ready for takeoff," her flight attendant said softly. "Just a moment, please," Maria replied, her eyes not leaving the screen. "This can't wait." The footage was clear and damning. She had captured everything: Barrett's aggressive stance, his different treatment of other passengers, and Dr. Washington's dignified responses. Most importantly, she had recorded the moment when Barrett let other passengers through without checking their documents, proving his discrimination. Maria added a simple caption: "Witness racism in real time. Successful black CEO blocked from her private flight while others walk through freely. This happened 30 minutes ago. Share widely. Hashtag stop discrimination, hashtag privilege check." She hit post, and the video went live to her 3 million followers. Within minutes, the responses started pouring in. "This is outrageous. Who is this guard? That CEO handled it with such grace. I recognize her. That's Dr. Washington from BioFuture Solutions. Name and shame the airport. This is unacceptable." 10 minutes after posting, the video had 50,000 views. 20 minutes later, it crossed 100,000. Major news networks were already sending direct messages to Maria, requesting permission to use the footage. Meanwhile, in another private jet preparing for takeoff, Samantha was unaware that she had become the center of a viral moment. She was focused on reviewing her presentation, trying to put the unpleasant incident behind her and concentrate on the important meeting ahead. Her phone buzzed with a message from her assistant, Sarah. "Dr. Washington, you need to see this. The incident is going viral." Maria Rodriguez posted a video. Samantha clicked the link. As she watched the scene play out from Maria's perspective, she felt a complex mix of emotions. The video showed everything: Barrett's hostility, the clear discrimination, and the support she eventually received from other passengers. Back in the terminal, Barrett sat in the manager's office, his face pale as he watched the view count climb on Maria's post. Thomas Reynolds, the terminal manager, paced behind his desk. "Do you understand what you've done?" Reynolds asked, running his hands through his graying hair. "This isn't just about you losing your job anymore. Our whole security operation is under scrutiny now." Barrett's phone kept buzzing with notifications. People had already identified him from his name tag in the video. His social media accounts were being flooded with angry messages. "I was just following security protocols," Barrett mumbled, but even he didn't seem to believe it anymore. "No, you weren't," Reynolds snapped. "We've reviewed the security footage from the last 3 months. This isn't the first time you've profiled passengers, is it?" Before Barrett could answer, Reynolds' phone rang. It was the airport's corporate office. The video had reached their attention. In her jet, Maria watched as her posts continued to gain traction. News websites were already publishing stories. Professional organizations were releasing statements condemning the discrimination. The private aviation industry was being forced to confront an uncomfortable truth about prejudice in their operations. She received a direct message that made her smile. "Thank you for recording this, Dr. S. Washington." Maria replied quickly. "Thank you for showing such strength. This needed to be exposed." As both jets took off from the airport, the story continued to spread. Regular news networks picked up the story. Aviation forums were filled with discussions about security protocols and bias. Civil rights organizations announced they would investigate patterns of discrimination at private airports. Barrett's actions, recorded and shared with the world, had opened a door that couldn't be closed. The video wasn't just about one incident anymore. It had become a catalyst for a larger conversation about racism in luxury travel and corporate spaces. By the time Samantha's plane reached cruising altitude, #PrivateJet while black was trending nationwide. Thousands of people were sharing similar stories of discrimination in high-end spaces. What had started as one woman's dignified stand against prejudice had become a movement. Maria looked out her jet window at the clouds below, knowing that sometimes the biggest changes start with simply pressing record at the right moment. The truth, when properly exposed, had a power all its own. By noon, the private airport's corporate office was in chaos. The CEO, Robert Montgomery, had called an emergency meeting with his executive team. The video of Barrett's discrimination against Dr. Washington had reached millions of views and was now playing on major news networks. "How did we let this happen?" Montgomery demanded, staring at the TV screen mounted on the wall. CNN was showing Maria's video again, with the headline, "Racism at Elite Airport. CEO blocked from private jet." His phone rang for the 100th time that morning. This time, it was from one of their biggest clients, a Fortune 500 company. They wanted to know if they should take their business elsewhere. Meanwhile, in the terminal manager's office, Thomas Reynolds was dealing with his own crisis. More videos had surfaced from security cameras, showing Barrett's pattern of discriminatory behavior over the past months. Other passengers were coming forward with their stories. "Sir," his assistant interrupted, "there's someone here you need to speak with." A well-dressed woman entered the office. "I'm Janet Chen, Dr. Washington's attorney," she announced, placing her briefcase on the desk. "We need to discuss what happened this morning." Reynolds felt his stomach sink. "Of course, please sit down." In the security office down the hall, Barrett sat alone, watching his career crumble. His union representative had already told him there was little they could do. The video evidence was too clear. His phone kept buzzing with messages from reporters seeking comment. At the corporate headquarters, Montgomery's team was drafting their third public statement of the day. The first two had been criticized for being too vague and not taking enough responsibility. "We need to do more than just fire Barrett," said Sarah Martinez, the head of PR. "This is a systemic issue. People want to know how we're going to prevent this from happening again." Just then, Montgomery's assistant rushed in. "Sir, the National Aviation Authority is on line 1. They're launching an investigation into our security practices." Before he could respond, another executive spoke up. "It's not just them. I'm getting calls from other airports across the country. This incident is making everyone look at their own security protocols." The story had grown beyond a single incident at one airport. It had become a national conversation about discrimination in private aviation, a world that usually stayed hidden from public view. Back at the terminal, Janet Chen was methodically laying out her points to Reynolds. "Dr. Washington isn't interested in merely settling this quietly," she explained. "She wants systemic changes, real ones." Reynolds nodded nervously. "We're already planning to implement new training programs." "That's not enough," Chen interrupted. "We want a complete overhaul of your security protocols, independent oversight, regular audits, and a clear process for reporting and addressing discrimination." As they discussed terms, Barrett was being escorted from the building. Employees watched through office windows as he walked to his car, head down, followed by cameras from local news stations. In New York, where Samantha had just landed for her meeting, her phone was flooded with messages of support. Other Black executives were sharing similar experiences. Major companies were reaching out, wanting to join her in pushing for industry-wide changes. Her assistant Sarah called with an update. "Dr. Washington, the airport CEO wants to meet with you personally when you return, and you've been invited to speak at next month's National Aviation Security Conference." Samantha took a deep breath. Her cancer research presentation was still ahead of her, but now she had another equally important mission. This incident could lead to real change, but only if they kept the pressure on. At the terminal, Janet Chen was finishing her meeting with Reynolds. "One more thing," she said, pulling out another document. "We found 10 other incidents involving Barrett in the past year alone. This wasn't a one-time problem." Reynolds looked at the evidence in front of him: passenger complaints that had been ignored, internal reports that had been dismissed, warning signs that everyone had chosen not to see. By the end of the day, the airport had announced Barrett's termination and a complete review of their security practices. But that was just the beginning. The story had opened a door that couldn't be closed, revealing problems that could no longer be ignored. As evening approached, Barrett International Airport began trending on social media, not for its luxury services or celebrity clients, but as a symbol of the discrimination that lurked beneath the surface of even the most exclusive spaces. The truth about Richard Barrett's behavior at the airport began to emerge like pieces of a puzzle coming together. 3 days after the incident with Dr. Washington, Lisa Torres, a young investigative reporter, sat at her desk surrounded by stacks of complaints and security reports. "You need to see this," she called to her editor, holding up a file. Barrett wasn't just targeting random passengers. He had a system. The file showed that over the past year, Barrett had stopped and questioned 83% of minority passengers who approached his security post, while only checking documents for 6% of white passengers. But most of these incidents had never been reported. The passengers either didn't know how to file complaints or feared causing trouble. Meanwhile, Maria Rodriguez's social media coverage hadn't stopped with her first viral video. She had started a campaign called #ShareYourStory, encouraging other passengers to speak up about their experiences with discrimination at private airports. "I remember him," wrote one business owner. "Barrett made me wait 40 minutes while my own plane sat there ready to take off. I nearly missed an important meeting." Another post read, "I stopped using that airport because of him. I drove 2 hours to a different private terminal just to avoid the harassment." At her office in the biotech company, Samantha received an unexpected email. It was from Barrett's former colleague at another airport. "Dr. Washington, I worked with Barrett 3 years ago. He was fired for similar behavior, but they let him resign quietly. He just moved to another airport and did the same thing. This has to stop." Samantha forwarded the email to her lawyer, Janet Chen, who was building a strong case not just against Barrett, but against the entire security system that had protected him. That afternoon, the airport's board of directors met in an emergency session. The chairman, William Parker, looked grim as he reviewed the growing evidence. It wasn't just Barrett, he admitted to the board. "Our whole system failed. We ignored complaints. We didn't check references properly. We looked the other way." In the newsroom, Lisa Torres was putting the final touches on her investigative report. She had discovered that Barrett had worked at 4 different airports in the past 10 years, each time leaving after complaints about his behavior. But because none of the incidents were properly documented, he kept getting hired elsewhere. "The problem is bigger than one guard," she wrote in her article. "It's about an industry that values privacy so much, it sometimes protects the wrong secrets." The story caught the attention of aviation authorities. They announced a nationwide audit of private airport security practices. Other airports, nervous about facing similar scandals, began reviewing their own hiring procedures and complaint systems. At a small coffee shop near the airport, Maria met with several former employees who wanted to share their stories. They described how they had tried to report Barrett's behavior, but were told not to make waves. "Rich clients don't like controversy," one former supervisor explained. "So we were taught to keep everything quiet, even when we knew something was wrong." Maria recorded their stories, adding to the growing evidence of systemic problems in the industry. Her social media campaign had now reached over 10 million views and sparked similar movements at other airports. Back at her company, Samantha took time between meetings to read the latest developments. The cancer research funding had been secured. Her presentation in New York had been successful despite the stress of the incident. But now she had another mission. She drafted an email to her board of directors. "We need to use our influence to create change. I propose we start a foundation focused on fighting discrimination in corporate and luxury spaces." The responses came quickly, with board members unanimously supporting her idea. Several offered to contribute their own funds to the foundation. By the end of the week, Lisa Torres's investigative report was published. It revealed that Barrett's pattern of discrimination was just the tip of the iceberg. Private aviation had a systemic problem with bias hidden behind its exclusive walls and strict privacy policies. The article ended with a powerful quote from Dr. Washington. "Privacy shouldn't mean secrecy. Exclusivity shouldn't mean discrimination. It's time for this industry to change, and change starts with bringing the truth into the light." As the story spread, more airports began announcing new policies and training programs. The incident that began with one guard's discrimination had exposed problems that had been hidden for years. The truth was finally emerging, and with it came the first real hope for change. 1 week after the incident, the private aviation world was experiencing changes that nobody had expected. The video of Barrett's discrimination against Dr. Washington had opened a door that couldn't be closed, and now everyone was dealing with the aftermath. At his small apartment, Barrett sat watching the news coverage of his actions. His phone hadn't stopped ringing with reporters wanting comments, but he hadn't answered. His wife had taken their kids to stay with her parents after their home address was shared online. Former colleagues wouldn't talk to him. The reality of his actions was finally sinking in. Meanwhile, at the airport's main office, The changes were happening quickly. Thomas Reynolds, the terminal manager, stood before a group of security staff, introducing their new training team. Starting today, every employee will complete anti-bias training, he announced. And we're not just talking about a 1-hour video. This is a complete program with regular updates and testing. The security staff shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Many had worked with Barrett and had seen his behavior but said nothing. Now they were facing the consequences of their silence. In New York, Dr. Washington was meeting with a group of business leaders who wanted to support her newly formed foundation, Equal Access. Major companies were pledging millions of dollars to help fight discrimination in luxury travel and corporate spaces. What happened to me wasn't unique, Samantha told them, but we have a chance to make sure it becomes rare. Every dollar you pledge will help create new training programs, support investigation of complaints, and provide legal help to victims of discrimination. The foundation had already received over 500 reports of similar incidents at private airports across the country. Janet Chen, now working full-time for Equal Access, was organizing a team of lawyers to handle the cases. Maria Rodriguez's social media campaign continued to grow. She had created a website where people could safely share their stories of discrimination. The site crashed 3 times in its first week because so many people were trying to post their experiences. We've received over 10,000 stories, Maria told her followers in a live video update. And they're not just from airports. People are sharing experiences from exclusive restaurants, luxury hotels, high-end stores, anywhere where discrimination hides behind the mask of exclusive access. Lisa Torres's investigative reporting had expanded beyond Barrett. She discovered that many private airports had unofficial watch lists of passengers who faced extra screening, lists that seemed to target minorities disproportionately. These lists have no official oversight, she wrote in her follow-up article. No appeal process, no way to know if you're on them or why. They represent a shadow system of discrimination that needs to end. The airport CEO, Robert Montgomery, announced major changes in their operations. They hired their first chief diversity officer, created an independent review board for security complaints, and installed new camera systems to monitor all security interactions. We were wrong, Montgomery admitted in a press conference. We let discrimination flourish in our airport because we didn't want to look for it. That changes today. Other airports were following suit, afraid of facing similar scandals. The National Aviation Authority created new guidelines for private airport security, requiring regular audits of screening practices and clear documentation of all security stops. Barrett's former employers were also facing consequences. 2 airport managers who had let him resign quietly instead of firing him had been suspended. Their actions had allowed Barrett to continue his discriminatory behavior at new locations. Back at her office, Samantha reviewed the latest update from Equal Access. The foundation had already helped 3 passengers file discrimination lawsuits against different private airports. More importantly, they were working with aviation companies to create new industry standards for security screening. The goal isn't just to punish bad behavior, she explained to her board. It's to prevent it from happening in the first place. Every security officer should know that their actions are being watched and recorded. Every passenger should know their rights and how to report problems. As the day ended, Maria posted one final update. Change is happening, but it only continues if we keep watching, keep recording, keep speaking up. Discrimination thrives in silence. Our job is to keep making noise. The aftermath of Barrett's actions had created waves that were still spreading. What started as one guard's discrimination against one passenger had exposed problems that had existed for years. Now, finally, those problems were being addressed, one change at a time. 2 weeks after the incident, the private aviation industry was going through its biggest transformation in decades. At Barrett International Airport, the changes weren't just on paper, they were visible everywhere you looked. New signs hung in the terminal. See something? Say something. Report discrimination. Each sign had a QR code linking to a reporting website. Security cameras had been installed at every checkpoint, with screens showing passengers they were being recorded. The message was clear. Everything happening here was now out in the open. Dr. Washington stood at a podium in the airport's main conference room, addressing a group of security officers during their first day of new training. I'm not here to blame anyone, she began, looking at the nervous faces before her. "I'm here because we all have a chance to make things better. Your job isn't just about keeping airports safe, it's about making them fair." The security team included many new faces. After the incident, several officers had resigned, knowing their own behavior wouldn't stand up to the new scrutiny. Their replacements went through strict background checks and psychological screening. In the terminal manager's office, Thomas Reynolds met with Janet Chen to review the new complaint system. A large screen on the wall showed real-time data from security checkpoints. "Every stop is now documented," Reynolds explained. "The system flags any officer who shows patterns of targeting specific groups. We can't miss the warning signs anymore." Janet nodded, making notes. "And how are passengers notified of their rights?" "We've installed digital displays at every checkpoint," Reynolds replied. "They show the screening process in 8 different languages. No one should feel confused or intimidated anymore." Meanwhile, Maria Rodriguez was hosting a special live stream from the airport. Her followers watched as she went through the new security process, explaining each step. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a new feature. "Passengers can now request a supervisor at any time by pressing this button. The whole interaction is recorded and reviewed. No more situations where it's just your word against theirs." The changes weren't limited to just one airport. Across the country, private aviation facilities were racing to implement similar reforms. The National Aviation Authority had created a new division specifically focused on preventing discrimination in private air travel. At her foundation's new office, Samantha met with her team to review their progress. Equal Access had already helped implement changes at 12 major private airports. Their website received hundreds of messages daily from people sharing their experiences or asking for help. "We got something interesting," said Mike Chen, their data analyst. "Reports of discrimination at airports using our new system have dropped by 60% in just 2 weeks. When people know they're being watched, they behave differently." Lisa Torres, the investigative reporter, published another article about the industry changes. She had interviewed former security officers who admitted to years of discriminatory practices. "We were taught to look for certain types of people," one anonymous officer revealed. "No one ever said it directly. We all knew what they meant. Now finally, someone's saying it's wrong." Back at the airport, a new situation tested their reformed system. A first-time private jet passenger, a young black entrepreneur, was questioned by security. But this time, everything was different. The officer followed the new protocols exactly. Cameras recorded everything. A supervisor was present. The passenger received clear explanations for each step. What might have been a tense situation under the old system was now handled professionally and fairly. In the evening, Samantha received an unexpected email. It was from Barrett's wife. "Dr. Washington, I watched my husband change over the years. He became someone I didn't recognize. What happened was wrong, and our family is dealing with the consequences. But the changes you're making might help other people avoid his mistakes. Thank you for turning this incident into something positive." At her desk, Samantha reflected on how much had changed in just 2 weeks. Her cancer research was progressing well, but she had also found another calling. Equal access was becoming a powerful force for change. "Sometimes," she told a reporter later that day, "it takes one moment of darkness to help us find the light. What happened here was wrong, but the response, the change it created, that's something right." As the sun set over the airport, the new system continued working. Every passenger, regardless of their appearance, received the same professional treatment. Every interaction was recorded, every complaint taken seriously. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was getting better, one day at a time. 1 year after the incident that changed private aviation, Dr. Samantha Washington stood at a different podium. This time, she was accepting an award for corporate leadership and social change. The ballroom was filled with business leaders, civil rights activists, and aviation industry executives. "Change doesn't happen in a single moment," she began, holding the crystal award. "It happens when we refuse to let that moment be forgotten. 1 year ago, I was just trying to board a flight. Today, we've helped transform an entire industry." The numbers told the story. Equal Access had grown from a single foundation to a national organization with offices in 12 cities. They had helped implement new security protocols at over 50 private airports. Discrimination complaints had dropped by 85% at facilities using their system. In the audience, Maria Rodriguez smiled, remembering how it all started with her phone camera. Her hashtag #ShareYourStory campaign had evolved into a permanent platform where people could report discrimination in any luxury space. The website had helped expose and correct unfair practices at high-end restaurants, exclusive clubs, and luxury stores. The ripple effect has been amazing, Maria told her followers later that evening. When one industry changes, others follow. Nobody wants to be the next viral video of discrimination. Lisa Torres, now heading a special investigative unit focused on corporate discrimination, had published a book about the airport incident and its aftermath. The book revealed how Barrett's case had exposed similar problems across the luxury service industry. What happened that day was just the tip of the iceberg, Lisa wrote in her conclusion. But sometimes that's all you need, one crack to let the light in. At Barrett International Airport, things had changed so much that new employees often didn't believe the stories about how it used to be. The security checkpoints were models of professionalism. Every interaction was recorded, reviewed, and stored. Monthly reports tracked statistics to ensure no group faced unfair targeting. Thomas Reynolds, still the terminal manager, gave regular tours to officials from other airports wanting to learn from their example. "We learned the hard way," he would tell them, "but we learned well." The former security guard, Richard Barrett, had moved to another state and found work in a different field. His story was now used in training sessions as an example of how bias could destroy careers and lives. But even his story had led to positive change. Background checks in the security industry were now more thorough, preventing people with histories of discrimination from simply moving to new locations. Janet Chen, who had started as Dr. Washington's lawyer, now ran the legal division of Equal Access. They didn't just fight discrimination, they helped companies prevent it. "It's better for everyone," she explained during a training session. Companies spend less time dealing with complaints and more time improving their services. Employees work in a clearer, fairer system, and customers know they'll be treated with respect. At her biotech company, Samantha had achieved another dream. The cancer treatment she'd been pursuing had shown promising results in clinical trials. The morning of the incident, she'd been flying to a meeting that helped fund that research. Now, a year later, both her medical work and her social justice work were saving lives. "Success isn't just about reaching the top," she told a group of young entrepreneurs. "It's about reaching back to help others up. When one door opens for you, make sure it stays open for those who follow." The National Aviation Authority had made their reformed security protocols the industry standard. Every private airport in the country now had to follow strict guidelines about fair treatment, transparent processes, and proper documentation of security interactions. As Samantha concluded her acceptance speech, she shared a final thought. "A year ago, someone tried to block my path because of how I looked. Today, we've helped clear the path for countless others. That's not just change, that's progress." The audience rose in a standing ovation. In the crowd were faces of all colors, ages, and backgrounds. Corporate leaders, activists, aviation workers, and ordinary people who had found their voices through this movement. Later that night, as Samantha boarded her private jet, the security process was smooth, professional, and exactly the same as for every other passenger. The guard smiled, checked her documents, and wished her a pleasant flight. As her plane took off into the night sky, Samantha thought about how far they'd come. One difficult moment had sparked a movement. One incident had led to lasting change. And somewhere, another person who might have faced discrimination would now walk through those airport doors with confidence, knowing that the path was clearer because someone had refused to let injustice go unchallenged.